before that, when you started really getting politically involved, and then how that transferred into your involvement, your affiliation, whatever you want to call it, with the Boogaloo Boys, and why you felt it was necessary for you, just you're speaking for yourself, to make comrades with such a group.
Yeah, so pretty much like always, even kind of when I was a bit of a leftist, I always really liked the ideas of militia and everything like that, of like organizing the community and like if anything goes bad, we're the people with the guns that are going to protect people. But I always had issue finding groups because traditionally militias are like old white dudes smoking cigars, hanging out with a bunch of Confederate flags, and like very, very conservative and boomerish, and don't really fit in that, as like young people. So I kind of I was looking for something. And then, months before even, the coronavirus or anything, this kind of like libertarian anarchist kind of idea was coming along with militias of like, hey, we're sick of these guys. They're all fake. They're just a bunch of old dudes. They're never going to do anything. They just sit around and complain about liberals, and they're not going to step up. So like, let's start organizing as like young people. Like, let's be the next generation. And that sort of was the foundation and how that started bubbling. And then when the lockdown, like the lockdowns, Duncan Lemp and Breonna Taylor, all three of those events happening so close to each other, kind of like catalyzed everything and brought all of us together. And in the beginning, it was much more free-formed and like the ideas weren't as hammered out. So you did have more traditional conservative people kind of like hanging out and stuff. But as more and more we were showing up to like events that the right wing would be very upset that we were at and why we were at those events, all of those people left. And by the time we were hitting summer and everything, the idea of the Boogaloo movement, as I talk about it, had finally started solidifying as like this exclusively libertarian anarchist thing. And all the other people had bled off and started calling us communists and dirty anarchists and everything, even though that's like the reason why that movement started coming together. If we wanted to be 3%ers or Oath Keepers or something, we would just go join those organizations. We wanted something different. So that's kind of how all that like came into being.
I think that's okay. So I think that's a good like jumping off point to talk about the Boogaloo Boys, because I think something that is getting maybe, I don't know, misinterpreted, probably intentionally, is that this isn't even a centralized movement, correct? This is not like, you don't have like a national organizational structure. There's no hierarchy. It's mostly just independent groups throughout the country, kind of adhering to the same sort of ideals. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the individual, it's mostly by state, but even like in some states, there's multiple kind of different, for lack of a better word, factions, even though everyone's kind of cool with each other. But we all agree on these basic unifying principles, and there has been attempts to make national organizations, but we're a bunch of anarchists, so it doesn't really work out well. And a lot of people scream at each other and then go their own way. But it's very decentralized. Nobody represents anybody. I only speak for myself and the people that have given me direct permission to speak for them. And if anyone thinks that if anyone disagrees with me, they will let me know immediately. And that was kind of the thing with Antifa in the beginning. Like if you go back to like May and June, talking to people about the idea of marching with Antifa would have been like, no, and they would call you crazy and they didn't want that. But there was people in the movement like me and other people that started meeting people from Antifa on these events and kind of changing our mind and being like, hey, do we have this kind of like, whether we were aware or not, like conservative bias against this group? Have we been lied to? And we talked to them more and more, and we, things organically changed throughout the entire movement to get to where it is now. So it's very decentralized. It's very internet culture in that way. Which I think like a lot of people that don't understand internet culture like struggle to try to put us in a box desperately when that's just not how things work.
Right. And I actually think that leads me to another point that we really wanted to make sure that we included here, is that people seem to be attributing political positions or ideas to you that you have never yourself said that you hold. People are claiming that you're a Nazi, or that you're a white supremacist, or that you're racist, or that you're homophobic, or whatever. I've seen it all over Twitter.
Homophobic is surreal.
People are attacking you. Right.
That's surreal. Like,
Yeah.
Well, you have a really homophobic flag in the background. So.
yeah, I know. It's an extraordinarily homophobic flag. And, like
Yes.
the way I talk and, like my habitual flirting with men on Twitter, definitely very homophobic behavior.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's a very strange phenomenon that, just because you associate with this group that has, for whatever reason, been given this moniker of being a white supremacist group, you are now being labeled as such, despite the fact that you very clearly, put forth your own ideas, which are nothing to do with white supremacy or Nazism or any of those things.
Yeah.
So,
And
is that...
there's been like and it was really weird because the first week of me like going public on Door and like everyone going to my Twitter, I went through so many weird purity tests of just like these left-wing people coming out of nowhere and being like, what's your opinion on this? What's your opinion on abortion? What's your opinion on environmentalism? What is your opinion on whiteness? And I'm like, yeah, I have opinions on all of those, but I know you're asking me because you want to get an answer from me, and then if you're not happy with that, you will go and say the entire Boog stands for this. And I'm like, I'm aware of what you're doing. Like, you're not asking for my personal opinion. You're looking for something to demonize every single person who flies the same flag as me. That's super devious and shifty and it's gross. It's just gross behavior.
Yes, I agree. I mean, there are, okay, so prior to your speech and being on Jimmy Dore, I had heard of the Boogaloo Boys, but I had never really paid that much attention to who they were, what they stood for, what they did. I just kind of like had heard the name and was like, okay, whatever. But since you went on Jimmy Dore, I really like tried to do, some research, which is difficult because it isn't really an organization. It is decentralized. There wasn't any one specific like galvanizing point in which birthed the movement. Like Black Lives Matter, it was a very clear, distinct point in time. It was like Trayvon Martin was murdered, Black Lives Matter was born. It's much more difficult to do, a research into the Boogaloo Boy movement. But I've done my best.
I definitely could say that the moment would be the Duncan Lemp murder. Like the
Right.
the moment that happened, everybody was like that. We officially formed because a lot of these 3%er organizations and everything wouldn't even show up to his protest. They didn't care. The conservatives were, conservative people are all like, oh, why don't you protest and riot when a white dude's shot by a cop? And it's like, we tried, and you guys didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't show up. The only people there were libertarians and anarchists. No conservatives showed up. So that was kind of the moment where we're like, we need to go our own way. Like, this is dead weight. They don't actually believe what they believe. And if we're going to do this, we need to be our own thing. So.
Right.
But I think that's really hard to find on the internet because the underreporting on the Duncan Lemp situation is so crazy. The media does not want to talk about that at